Welcome to the Solid Verbal. And now, Dan and Ty.
Dan Rubenstein, we have 2 weeks of the regular season left, my friend. It is a pleasure, as always, to be back with you for this Tuesday episode, sir. How goes it?
Good. Does that mean 2 more weeks of yelling about what I'm going to assume is Oklahoma football? Right? I don't know which team you think is going to be the core of this molten hot lava mountain of takes that we're going to have in front of us these next few weeks, but it feels like Oklahoma might be right in that middle portion, right?
I think Oklahoma, Miami's
in there,
Notre Dame, and there will definitely be, and we got a question about this, I'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah.
About how many SEC teams are going to get into the field of 12.
Yeah.
Some combination of those 4 things, teams, conversations, topics, whatever, that is going to be where the molten hot. Maybe we'll take a Toa out for some of these conversations.
Take a Toa out, yeah.
Down the stretch here. But we're getting into the thick of it, aren't we?
We are. I mean, I could see my team, Oregon, if they drop one of these games, getting involved in that conversation, USC getting involved in that conversation. I think it extends beyond, and then you start talking about the teams that they've played, and like Mizzou starts getting involved in that conversation, just looking at them as an opponent against a team like Vanderbilt, against a team coming up here in Oklahoma. So then it's going to be a referendum on what Mizzou is or isn't as an opponent. There's so much meat on the take bone, Ty.
And then maybe just like a drizzle of BYU.
Oh my, BYU is absolutely in the nucleus here. Definitely.
In that conversation. So we're going to go through a bunch of that and much, much more. We are not doing the early look aheads on this episode because right now it's looking like it's going to be a slim pickings Saturday. And by that, I mean there's like 3 really big games and the rest are certainly interesting in their own right. And we will talk about those on Thursday, but we wanted to save all of that for Thursday, mainly so we had something to talk about.
Correct.
What that means is on today's episode, we got a bunch of emails. We got a bunch of comments out on our Patreon at verballers.com from our certified and premium members. We are going to go through a multitude of questions. We're also going to reveal the poll and how that translates to a bracket in just a little bit as well. So we've got a lot to talk about, even if it's not the normal stuff that we talk about on a Tuesday.
Yes. Are you mentally prepared, though, as we look ahead for Mercer to beat Auburn? That's my question. 9-1 Mercer.
Yeah, man.
Absolute FCS strong dog. Are you ready for that conversation? Okay. We've got a lot to get to. I'm very excited, but thank you to the SEC for scheduling. I think Eastern Illinois is in there. I think Samford is in there. The Mercer Bears, I should have said a strong bear. Eastern Illinois, 1-9 Charlotte is in there, 1-10 Samford, Western Kentucky, pretty good team though, we should say. Coastal Carolina, kind of an average season, but the SEC doing its part to make this kind of a shrunken Saturday.
Shrunken Saturday. By the way, it's not shrunken yet, but
oh, look at that. Oh, you got to get on youtube.com/@solidverbal. Show the camera.
This is one of the shirts that we got.
Oh my God.
One of the shirts that you put together. You're the designer-in-chief here. We've got a bunch of other cool merch out at merch.solidverbal.com, or if you go to our store, or our site, and click on the store from the top nav, you can get on over.
Yes.
You were busy. You were in the lab. We designed a bunch of new stuff.
Constantly.
We've also got a couple of other ones that we'll reveal here over the next few episodes. I mean, they're out there now. You can go see them, but we just got a nice little order that arrived in the mailbox before we hit record. So before long, you'll see all of these on the videos if you're ever so inclined.
Yes. I can't wait for everybody to see it. They look good. They're going to be more coming out. Love it.
Why don't we start where one of the places that we have started on these Tuesday episodes, Dan. Let's reveal the Verballer Top 12 poll. I think it's a good way to sort of set the table for where this conversation is going to go. So 1, 2, and 3 are all the same. Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M. But after that, it starts to look a little bit different. Georgia is up to 4. Texas Tech is up to 5. Oregon in this poll is up to number 6, ahead of Ole Miss, Oklahoma, and Alabama, who are 7, 8, and 9. And then to round out the top 12, we've got Notre Dame at 10, BYU at 11, and Georgia Tech at number 12. Again, many of these results will probably be rendered meaningless. In the matter of time, as many of you are listening to this on a Tuesday morning, this evening, the playoff committee's new set of rankings will be out there. Their newest projected bracket will be out there. So make of this whatever you will, but just to give you some idea for how that would translate, just to give you some sense for what the playoff field might look like, we would have a rematch of 8 Oklahoma hosting number 9 Alabama, with the winner taking on Ohio State. We would have now number 5 Texas Tech hosting number 12 James Madison, with the winner squaring off against Georgia.
Wow.
We would have your Oregon Ducks playing host to number 11 Georgia Tech, with the winner squaring off against Texas A&M. And last but certainly not least, we would have number 7 Ole Miss hosting number 10 Notre Dame, with the winner squaring off against Indiana, Dan. So again, make of this whatever you will.
Mm-hmm.
I do think we're going to see a fair amount of action, a fair amount of reshuffling the deck here. Many of the teams will remain locked in at this point, but certainly the matchups and the pathways and all of the cool stuff that we like to talk about once we have a better idea for who's playing, much of that is still up in the air at this point.
I don't have anything strong. Again, I can, after this past week, and I'm a big advocate of, let's not just take this past weekend's results, but even recent results. And then we're at week 13 now. We're heading into week 13. So the resume conversations are pretty real. You can look at what a team has and hasn't done against who's placed in front of them in their conference slate and who they have chosen to play in the non-conference portion of their schedule. I was advocating for Texas A&M to get consideration over Indiana last week. I'm going to stay limber. Also, I'm printing Stay Limber shirts available at merch. No, I'm not. Well, maybe I could. I don't know.
We could.
But what I am recommending is at least a conversation or a thought right now about Georgia over A&M after this past weekend. What do you think?
I'm still an A&M guy.
Okay.
I'm still an A&M guy, but it's not lost to me that it feels to some degree like Georgia's gotten better.
Right. I totally agree.
And even though I might not fully subscribe to that yet, I do subscribe to your other mantra, which is that the season is a living, breathing thing.
Mm-hmm.
And a team in week 1 is not a team in week 13. You know,
right.
Oftentimes, pretty much across the board, teams change, they get better, they get worse. But what we saw from Georgia this past week, I thought was really impressive. That was really impressive.
Agree.
The way they sort of hit the afterburners in the fourth quarter and just blew past them. So I understand the argument. I'm not there yet.
You're not there yet. You think Texas A&M has earned grace, needing I was going to say second half, kind of a third quarter comeback to take down South Carolina. But they've had other close calls, and they have not played the best of the SEC. Not their fault, right? No. Things have shaken out in the conference in a way that has advantaged the Aggies schedule-wise. But, okay. Again, if somebody were insistent on Georgia at 3 with a loss to Alabama, a close loss at home to Alabama, and A&M having close calls against less than stellar teams, but at all times also completely overwhelming teams in that bottom, however, chunk of the SEC, I don't think I would have a good argument against it.
No.
So, okay.
I mean, the only other thing that I'll add to this conversation, and we kind of have a question about this, so I don't want to give the game away too much, but I think it is going to be intense between 4 teams in the American and 1 team in the Sun Belt trying to qualify for that coveted G6 playoff spot.
Right.
I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating these last 3 weeks of the year, if you count conference championship week, to see who the committee eventually gives the nod to. We might get some indications of that Tuesday night. They give us the latest polls, because in last week's poll, the only G6 team that was ranked was USF. My hunch is that we're going to see JMU. My hunch is that we might see North Texas. There are a couple teams that we might see start to bubble their way up. How does the committee feel about ECU or Tulane? Even Navy.
Right.
It's going to be interesting. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But that is what I am watching right now. We got a bunch of questions about the playoff. Maybe we could just jump right in. But this is where the Verballerhood is at with their Verballer Top 12. As per usual, we will post this across all of our social channels. Let us know who's too high, who's too low.
Is there, by the way, in this conversation as we go through, because there are a number of quality teams at or near the top of the American, the Mountain West. Obviously, you mentioned James Madison in the Sun Belt. What is the best G6, however you want to quantify these conferences? What is their best non-conference win? Is it Tulane over Duke?
Probably, yeah.
I'm trying to think because in that Cincinnati season, we had Cincinnati over Notre Dame, correct?
That's right.
And that was a good Notre Dame team. Not a great, but good Notre Dame team.
Sure.
And so I'm just trying to think about if you're trying to separate these teams, obviously we're going to get a championship game and we're going to get tiebreakers to get the two teams that appear in the American Championship. But I'm just looking at this as, Memphis did beat Arkansas, which is not nothing, but it's not an upper half of the SEC team.
I mean, what about USF beating Florida? I don't think USF is going to necessarily be in the running for the playoff field, but
Right.
USF on the road dropping Florida is about as good as it gets.
I would say so. I would say that the problem is they lost their third game. So that becomes a little bit trickier. ECU had that opportunity but lost to NC State. James Madison had that opportunity, I think in a big way, but lost to Louisville. So it's just, look, they're going to get, one of these teams is going to get in. So it's not like a Cincinnati issue where they're trying to get into a 14 playoff as like a considered non-power conference team. Right. But I just wonder resume-wise, what is going to sing the loudest when that conversation is had?
Dan, as you know, we put out the call on our Patreon.
Yes.
For questions. It's been a minute since we did a mailbag episode. Let's dive on in.
Congratulations, Skippy. You've got mail.
You've got mail on the Solid Verbal.
As often as we can, Dan Rubenstein, we like to give a nod to the Verballerhood, pay homage to the fine folks out there who support the show and have something they would like to offer. Let's first start with this one from Bob. Ohio State or the field? Can anyone beat this year's Ohio State team given what we have seen after 10 games? Can anyone take advantage of their one vulnerability, which appears to be the inability to run the ball, Dan? If I gave you a bet, and I said you get Ohio State or you get the field to win the national championship, which one are you taking?
Oh, the field. And I think Ohio State may be the best team. I just think it would be irresponsible given Ohio State's schedule thus far since that Texas game to feel great, like to feel impenetrable about Ohio State and their chances to win the national championship when there is, a grouping of teams that feature, Georgia and Texas A&M and Texas Tech and Oregon and Indiana. Like they're just those teams out there that odds-wise, you're also saying Ohio State needs to be perfect in terms of health, especially at quarterback, maybe along the offensive line where there's a lot full-time new, that it's a slog. And by the way, should also point out Ohio State is doing something very specific and strategic to limit potential health issues. Obviously it's football and, all it takes is a play for a season to go to the crapper. But they are playing slowly and more deliberately to limit the number of plays, especially their offense is playing when they can control that. But I guess, as a result, the defense is playing fewer plays. Also because the defense just gets the hell off the field pretty quickly.
Nobody can move the ball in the defense.
Right. So
also does help.
And there we are with the defense leaving the field once again. So they're being very deliberate about this. They're playing the long game, and who's to blame them? Obviously, it's working quite well, and it worked quite well last year, largely. I mean, I'm looking at a couple of games that I'm sure they'd like to have back, but when you win a national championship, you don't really need to apologize for much. So that said, I'd still take the field. I just think there are too many teams that are capable of an excellent game, and it's still a road that Ohio State's going to have to go through. But yeah, if you're going to bet your money on any one team, I'd probably take Ohio State in this moment. Sure.
Do you think it's fair that Bob points out here that at least in his view, Ohio State's vulnerability is an inability to run the football?
It's all relative.
Right.
If you're an Ohio State fan, you are used to seeing some incredible running backs this past decade or so, J.K. Dobbins and Trey Henderson, guys like that. But yeah, I think there's a certain standard at Ohio State that annually under Ryan Day, you've seen some incredibly complete offenses. And this year, with offensive line changes, I know there's some questions about the inside of this line at times in terms of consistency and strength, that, you know, they haven't been as dominant. They haven't found like a guy who is like the all-American caliber dude that they're used to having more often than not. And so, yes, it's relative to what they're used to, but I think that's a reasonable concern because in those short yardage moments against, say, Georgia or Indiana in a conference championship game, you'd like to be able to control the red zone area. You'd like to be able to control those short yardage moments. You'd like to open up some play action stuff. And look, again, you're picking the smallest of nits here in talking about it because they've been blowing out everybody. But once again, we haven't seen them measured against the best in the conference and measured against the best in the country, at least since they took on that Texas defense in week 1. And even that Texas defense has sort of taken some hits since then. So, yeah, I think it's a reasonable quibble because there's not much you can pick on about the defense with how they've performed. There's not much you can pick on with Julian Sayin. There's not much you can pick on this group of pass catchers, you know, tight end, receiver included. So if you're going to look at one area that's less than usually stellar, I guess it's the run game, right?
Bo Jackson is averaging close to 6.3 yards per carry.
Sure.
And I think he has grown into this offense. I don't think it's fair to say that there's an inability to run the ball. I think, to your point, there's been a conscious decision. Very gradually.
Sure.
Sort of like easing into a cold bath, right? We're just going to very slowly bring Bo Jackson along, bring this rushing game along. So I think by the time we get to the playoff, if they need to lean on the ground game, they will be able to lean on the ground game. But I do understand the logic there because at least on paper, it looks as if that's the weakness. Let me share a personal story, though, when it comes to
Please.
The infamous blank versus the field bet. And we see this all the time. When I was in my 20s, when I was young and full of life and had fewer grays, my summer job was as a caddy at a country club. And the caddy master, who, pardon the expression, was an enormous dick.
Okay.
Every single golf major, he would come over to the caddy shack and he would ask all of us, who wants to do a Tiger Woods versus the field bet?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us would jump at it. I jumped at it twice. I lost twice.
Mm-hmm.
Other people lost multiple times. Granted, this was prime Tiger when he was winning all of the tournaments. But from that point forward, after seeing the caddy master make a killing off of that bet, I have always proceeded with caution when it comes to these types of propositions.
Yeah.
I don't take any of them for granted. I would probably go Ohio State here.
Okay.
And I understand that the logic is on the side of the field, and I think everything you're saying and some of the stuff that Bob brings up here, it's all relevant. Mm-hmm. Absolutely relevant. I just think Ohio State's the best team so far this year. I do. I think they're complete. I have not seen anybody get Julian Sayin off rhythm. They have a embarrassment of riches out wide. If they are starting to learn to run the football, that makes them a more complete offense, and nobody's really been able to do anything on this defense. So I understand that there's always a possibility, but whether I'm getting odds or not, give me Ohio State.
I'm totally okay with that standpoint, Ty. I'm totally okay with that viewpoint, other than the fact that we're talking about sports here with football, not golf. And at no point was Vijay Singh ever going to suplex Tiger Woods out of nowhere and end his season. Now, there were other threats, external threats to Tiger Woods' success, as it turns out.
There absolutely were.
But it wasn't Davis Love tackling him below the knees. It wasn't that.
I'm just saying I have learned to proceed with caution when you get the blank versus the field bet because
Right.
of my own personal experience. I must have lost
I hear
$100 to this guy.
Yeah.
I couldn't stand him. But he would come around with this bet, and like clockwork, everybody would take the bait. He must have made a killing during Prime Tiger.
It was
I don't know
great.
how much he made off that. Thank you for the question, Bob. Let's go to Zach. He says, which of the contending G6 teams has the best chance of pulling a 12/5 upset in the playoffs, Dan?
Ooh, I like this. Okay.
I love this question.
So what do you need? What is your anatomy of an upset here to use? Who was it? Was I saying that over and over again? Or anatomy of a comeback? I think it was Booger McFarland during the South Carolina A&M highlights.
Right. Does he say that as much as he says no doubt?
Oh, that's a good one. Probably not.
Don't play the drinking game where you take a swig every time Booger says no doubt.
Yes.
Don't. I would advise against that. I'm telling all my clients to mute the TV when that happens.
So what to you is the immediate factor where you're like, if I'm picking a team, this is what I need to have them pull off a shocker if it appears that the talent level isn't on the same plane?
It needs to be a team that does not have a catastrophic defense.
I agree.
It cannot be a team that is just, even remotely like a half team. Because bear in mind, if you're at 12, you're probably going to go up against a team like a Georgia, a team like a Texas Tech, maybe Oregon can worm their way up into, or you're talking about complete teams that can do a lot well on offense in particular. And also are very, very good on defense. That's why they're the number 5 seed to begin with.
Sure.
You're not going to get horrible defenses up at number 5. So you need a team that is good enough to create an extra drive, a team that is good enough to force a mistake, a team that is not relying solely on their offense to try and outscore an opponent, because I don't think you're going to be able to do that. Like, I like North Texas a lot.
Mm-hmm.
North Texas, per the latest run of the SP Plus, has the number 3 offense in America.
Yeah.
They're very fun. They're very good. I am rooting for North Texas like hell. It's a great story. They've got the number 77 SP Plus defense. What do we think happens if we put them up against, like, Georgia? How do we think that goes?
They're going to have to find new ways to win. Yeah.
So I only think there is one answer for this, and that's James Madison. JMU
Okay.
is clearly the best defense of the teams that I think we are considering right now for that remaining spot. And again, those 5 teams, including James Madison, are Navy, ECU, Tulane, and North Texas. Now, ECU is not bad defensively.
Right.
They're a top 50 defense, but JMU, by comparison, is dramatically better. I think they're the only answer here for this question. And I would go a step further and say that because of the straight seeding model, and this is not to say that, a team like a JMU or any of these G6 teams would end up playing some kind of tomato can, even in the old setup.
Mm-hmm.
But especially now, I think with the straight seeding, it makes it harder to come up with a scenario, at least this year, where we're looking at an upset of 12/5.
Right. Okay. I think I'm with you. I mean, I had given some consideration to ECU as well, just because I think the quality of team they're playing might be a little bit higher and their defense has been good. But yeah, ultimately I'd take a potential game-changing quarterback in combination with that defense, and they've held down the best of, they haven't won any 47-43 games this season.
No.
They've held teams to 10, 23, 20, 27 against ODU, but they're scoring all the time, so it's a possession thing as well, and that's a good ODU team. They gave up 14, 7, 10, 13. They gave up 28 to Louisville week 2 on the road, and 10 the week before that to a Weber State team that doesn't even play on this level. I think JMU is the answer. I do think I agree with you in JMU. The great thing about them is they force a ton of 3-and-outs. They are, I believe, terrific on third down on defense. And so that's its own skill, figuring out ways to confuse and get off the field quickly. I don't trust them to do it, but of these teams, if you're giving me the choice of, a potentially game-changing quarterback performance combined with the ability to get off the field on defense,
Right.
I think it's James Madison, who, by the way, sidebar, should absolutely have been hosting should absolutely be hosting game day this week ahead of
Yes.
their matchup against Wazoo. That should
agree.
be out of Harrisonburg this week, and they're going to SC Oregon, which I don't know. That doesn't get me going like it used to when game day would go to Oregon. They're already there this year for the Indiana game. They should be at JMU or like Brawl of the Wild or something.
Yeah,
Take the opportunity.
I completely agree. But I think the answer is JMU, and you're right to bring up the quarterback thing. Alonzo Barnett's had a good year.
Mm-hmm.
He's had a good year, and he's dynamic. He's a runner. He's a thrower. They can do a lot with him, and they have.
He's a runner. Creative. He's a track star. Yeah.
And Tulane has a little bit of the same going on with Jake Retzlaff, but I don't think Tulane as a team is as good right now as JMU.
Also, they're starting Seinfeld and Jurassic Park's Wayne Knight at starting running back, Ty.
How can you
Their
not like
tailback is Wayne Knight. Television's Wayne Knight.
Let's go to Nate. Nate says, Stu Mandel said that the SEC might get 5 or 6 teams into the playoff.
Woo!
That's crazy, right? The 5th, the 6th place team in any conference are just not that good, even in the vaunted SEC.
So be specific.
Who question?
Yeah.
This isn't so much a question as it is, I think, a comment from Nate.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
That's too many teams for any one conference to send to the playoff?
Yeah, the 5th, the 6th place team in that conference, in any conference, just isn't that good.
If there were 6 SEC teams in the playoff, it would be such a disservice to the sport. It would be so god-awful for this sport to send, I guess in this case, would it be Vanderbilt?
It would be either Vandy or, if something really comes off the swivel, Texas.
If it were to happen today, it would be Vanderbilt likely, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I don't see how you can do that today. I don't see how you can do 6 is 7 bridges too far, let alone a bridge too far. Yeah, I would hesitate about what this playoff actually is if we're sending half of the field from one conference. We can have conversations about, who has earned it, up until now, right? Up like, what are the qualifications? What are the resumes? Like Vandy is number 12 right now in the country in the AP poll, which has no meaning, but that's just conversationally where some people who follow the sport closely, not all of the people that follow the sport closely, but some of the people who follow the sport closely have said Vandy is the 12th best team in the country. Am I looking at the right poll?
Yeah, well, if you're looking at the latest round of polling, in the AP, Vanderbilt is currently 12.
Yeah.
In the coaches poll, they are 13th. And if you go back to last week's college football playoff rankings, they were number 14.
Right.
So they're right there. They're behind Utah, behind BYU. They were behind Oklahoma and Texas. That will likely change. They're 1 spot ahead of Miami and 2 spots ahead of Georgia Tech as well. So there are a bunch of teams, I think, in that 11 through even 18 range that are supremely interesting in this conversation.
I agree.
Because truly, none of them are really out of it yet. We'll see how this week shakes out. But part of the reason why I think I am so excited about week 14 is we're going to see all of this break.
Mm-hmm.
It's all going to break sort of in tandem, and it's going to make for a massive week of football. I was telling you earlier, the games on Black Friday are enormous. The games on Saturday are enormous. We're going to have maybe our most watched show live on Saturday night.
Probably.
Just in response to what we're going to see go down in rivalry week. Because there's a lot that really could go on here. So many different possibilities I think are still on the table.
There will also be full nudity on that episode. I don't know if that's going to turn people on to the watching it live. Or...
We need to create AI avatars so that it's a little bit more appealing to
that's true.
Verballerhood.
No, okay, so like what are you considering now? Obviously you're considering the final 2 weeks of the season, and that's something that's an unknown right now. But when you look at teams in this conversation, like Miami, Utah, Georgia Tech has the opportunity to win the conference and get in no matter what. But you mentioned things getting screwy with Texas, or take your pick, Virginia, Oklahoma, obviously in this conversation, like we mentioned at the top. BYU is sitting the possibility of going 11-1, like I think a pretty reasonable possibility, right? For BYU, they finished the season with a difficult Cincinnati this weekend, and then a UCF team that seems pretty beatable at the moment for a team like BYU. So what are you considering with these teams? What's working for them and what's working against them in your mind without having the balance of their schedule?
Let me back up 1 second. Okay. More to the point, just put a bow on what I was just saying.
Please.
It's going to be week 13, so we're still, a week and a half out from rivalry week. But there are 3 games in particular, 3.5 games, let's say, that I think are going to determine a lot. The first is on Friday night. The first is Texas versus Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M is probably in regardless at this point.
Okay.
I dropped 2 games. Texas A&M is more than likely going to be in this playoff field, barring some sort of crazy disaster that I have yet to determine how that's even possible. I don't think Texas has a way in, but if everything breaks again, could they get a chance? Maybe. I don't know. But again, I don't think that's likely either. But Texas knocking off Texas A&M, I think, could have a big impact on where teams are seated.
Yeah.
All right, so that's one thing to watch on that front.
Texas A&M currently projected as a 66 to -8 winner over Samford per SP+. Continue.
Great. The second game that I am very interested in, and I think the ultimate agent of chaos these last 2 weeks, is Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has a big game, an enormous game against Pitt this week, followed by a year-ender, clean old-fashioned hate against Georgia. Now, obviously, if they were to lose to Pitt this week, that could pretty much submarine. It would submarine their ACC chances. If they win, they could, in all likelihood, go to the ACC championship game. They'd only
so
have one
if they lose
loss,
to
right?
Pitt, then who in turn plays for the ACC? I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, then we got to go and we got to see what happens the following week.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So if they win, they're in. If they lose, then there's a whole bunch of possibilities.
They're depending on a lot of help. Yeah,
absolutely. But I think furthermore, if Georgia Tech were to knock off Georgia, that brings into the conversation a whole range of other possibilities with respect to seeding. It probably has some impact on the lower end of that college football playoff field, right? We're looking at who's in the top 12, who's in the top 10, who gets bumped out, who gets left in. All of these things, I think, play a factor. If Georgia Tech wins, how far up do they vault? Who else might they knock back?
Yeah.
Right? Even a team like a Notre Dame could be vulnerable. If Georgia Tech were to beat Pitt and then beat Georgia, suddenly Georgia Tech's probably a top 10 team, and they're shouldering some teams out. So if they go on that run, they're very, very interesting to follow.
Well, they're shouldering teams out regardless because they have the opportunity to just win the ACC as well.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially, and that's a separate conversation.
Right.
But just in terms of the games that they have left, totally different than the conference championship game, which they may or may not be a part of. If you win those 2 games, that makes things really interesting, I think, is in particular on the back end of that college football playoff ranking. And then the third game that I would add, I'm not necessarily going to include Miami Pitt in here, even though I'm very interested in that. The third one is one I've been talking up, and it's one that everyone knows about already, and that's Michigan against Ohio State. Now, even though Ohio State, to me, feels inevitable, and even though I still am inclined to pick them as my national championship, come hell or high water at this point, whether they lose, whether they win against Michigan, they're still going to get into that playoff field.
Sure.
But Michigan knocking off Ohio State opens up a whole range of possibilities in the Big Ten.
Right. Well, that game eliminates Ohio State from the Big Ten championship.
If they were to lose, that eliminates Ohio State from the Big Ten championship.
Right.
Indiana, in all likelihood, gets in,
Sure.
going undefeated. But depending on what goes down this week with, say, USC Oregon, depending on what goes down the remainder of the season, there's a good number of teams that can still find their way into that Big Ten championship game. It is not likely that a team like USC could make it, but it is certainly not out of the realm of possibilities. Michigan knocking off Ohio State for what would this be? 4th, 5th straight year, whatever it is. That would make things incredibly complicated in the Big Ten, and it would definitely have far-ranging impact, again, on the bottom end of that college football playoff ranking. So for me, as a Notre Dame fan, I think if you're a BYU fan, I think if you're a fan of any of those, Utah, any of those teams sort of on the bottom, cusp of the college football playoff rankings. And we'll see how they treat a team like a Notre Dame this week. But I don't think it is safe for you if you are even at number 9 right now. I think there's a lot that could go on that could still shoulder you out. So keep those games in mind. Those are the three that I think have the most potential to make things really, really weird.
Definitely.
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I am thinking about who gets in and who doesn't get in.
In
terms of the SEC getting 5 or 6 in, I don't feel great either about one conference getting 6 teams in the playoff.
Right.
I think it's a little bit excessive. I would like to see a little bit more of an even distribution.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm alone in that. Certainly everybody outside the SEC feels that way, and I'm no different. But the way that the rankings are set up right now, there is, I think, a slim but very real possibility they could get 6 in.
Right. Yeah. The idea of like a 3-loss Oklahoma team getting in if they were to go down to who they have, Mizzou.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of like a 3-loss Oklahoma team getting in over like a 2-loss BYU team kind of rubs me the wrong way. Because it might mean that BYU loses to what, Texas Tech twice?
Yeah.
I'm not into the idea of like the possibility of 6 SEC teams getting in is just like laughable to me. Like what stands out? So what my question to you was like, what stands out to you as like the more intriguing elements of teams' resumes and cases for or against that are in this conversation? Like, is there anything about Miami that perhaps we are underselling? Is there anything about Notre Dame? Is there anything about Utah? Is there anything about, Oregon? Is there anything about Oklahoma? Is there anything, that like, how much should we be considering Oklahoma's loss to Texas because John Mateer was coming back from surgery? By the way, Oklahoma decided to start him, right? Yep. He didn't force their hand. No pun intended, but I'm glad we went there. That, how much do we weigh things like that? That Mizzou lost to Vanderbilt, but Bo Pribula got hurt in that game. Bo Pribula was not effective in that game, to be clear, against Vandy. But like, what are the contexts of resumes in these conversational teams that you think are pertinent to include?
Well, I'll tell you what interests me the most.
Okay.
And obviously I'm not in a position to decide what should count and what shouldn't. But what I am most interested in, especially this time of year, is when the committee puts a 2-loss team over a 1-loss team.
Okay.
So BYU is a really good example of that, right? BYU has 1 loss.
Yes.
BYU is behind a bunch of teams right now.
They were not competitive in that loss.
They were not competitive in that loss. I understand that. But BYU right now at 9-1 is behind a 2-loss Oklahoma, 2-loss Notre Dame, 2-loss Alabama. Personally, I don't think BYU beats any of those teams. I'm not sure BYU beats any of the teams in front of them.
Right.
They had a shot against Texas Tech. They got smoked.
Right.
But I'm curious to hear how the playoff committee rationalizes putting them behind.
On a certain level, I get it, because the strength of BYU's performance this season has been mixed, right? Double overtime against Arizona. Arizona's a good team, but double overtime against Arizona. So when you have the opportunity, if you're in a conference that does not have as many headliners, to make statements against the opponents in that conference, and you're beating Colorado by 3, right? Again, this doesn't mean that BYU is overrated, but I'm saying the full context of the BYU argument is like, let's look at how they performed against who they had to play against.
Right.
And it's not always the best. And to that end, by the way, I thought they had their most complete game this past weekend against TCU, a quality team that they ran away from immediately and performed. Did they have 4 sacks? Like, they overwhelmed TCU on the lines. Bear Bachmeier had an excellent game. They ran well. It was a very nice statement win for BYU when they haven't always had, they haven't always made them. So I think they're on the uptick right now, personally.
Yeah. So that the wrinkles, I think, along with that conversation are what I'm most interested in. And Miami, I think, is really interesting.
So
too.
what are other wrinkles do you see? What are what is it called when you look at your eyes? Is the crow's feet? Is that what the wrinkles by the eyes are?
I suppose.
You look pretty good, Ty. For being
Thank
like
you.
in your mid to late 40s, you look honestly terrific. Continue.
Miami is really interesting to me. Because obviously had the win over Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
That one rings close to home, but lost at home against Louisville, lost on the road at SMU.
Right.
I don't believe either is ranked at this point.
What is their strongest win? since that Notre Dame one? What is the strongest win? And you should include Notre Dame, but that is week 1, which we should devalue a little bit, but not fully devalue. So that's a great win for Miami. What is the strength of performance index for them, for you? Like in the ACC, what is that performance? You're like, yeah, that was their day.
They looked really good this past week against NC State.
Totally, yes.
I thought they looked awesome against NC State. But I think it's an open question looking at the rest of the schedule, to your point of what was the most impressive. The way that they mopped up on South Florida, I thought was intriguing because South Florida's been a ranked team. They're if nothing more, they're certainly a quality team. 49-12, they killed them.
And I would have Miami coming out of the American because of it. Continue.
But you're short on other marquee wins that I think you could really hang your hat on.
Also true about Notre Dame to some extent. The USC win,
for sure,
is like their kind of lone data point here.
It is. So I guess the question on the Miami front that we're going to have to come to grips with is they beat Notre Dame week 1, but then lost to what could end up being 2 unranked teams. Now, if they beat Pitt, if Pitt wins this week against Georgia Tech, that'll be a ranked opponent.
Agreed.
In all likelihood. I'm not sure how the committee's going to feel about Pitt, but I think if they beat Tech, they'll be ranked again. So there's a pretty good chance that they'll have a win over a good team if they can get past Pitt. But
and that's on the road, so that's good.
Losing to 2 unranked opponents, I think, really works against them. Even though they did beat a team like Notre Dame. And by the way, there are other teams in front of Miami, too. It's not just Miami versus Notre Dame.
Right.
For a playoff spot, there's a handful of other schools that I think if you compare resumes heads up, there's a pretty good chance that those schools get the nod.
Yes. And by the way, the win over Pitt was not nothing for Notre Dame, I should say. They were ranked. They've won a bunch of games. It's a quality win. They won that game on the road. It was a somewhat hostile crowd, I would say, in Acrisure. Is that where it is? Acrisure Stadium?
Pitt's going to beat Georgia Tech in Miami.
You think so?
I do. They're gonna win both those games.
Interesting. Okay. By the way, we should point, I mean, you sort of alluded to the fact that Miami's loss could be to 2 unranked teams. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. I
mean, Louisville just lost to Clemson. SMU's like kind of still in it for the ACC.
They very much are.
Yeah.
They very much are. They're in the others receiving votes category right now.
Yeah, they could make a huge leap
in the AP poll, but SMU is in a really interesting spot. They've got a game this week against Louisville. They've got a game next week against SMU. In theory, they should win both those games. Those look like 2 winnable games.
No, not Louisville. SMU is playing. They're not playing SMU.
SMU's playing Louisville and SMU's playing Cal.
There you go. You said SMU's playing SMU, which you know.
Well, they do in practice, but
I mean,
on Saturday they'll be playing against a different opponent. There's a pretty good chance that SMU is favored in both those games or wins both of those games.
Yes.
And so what ends up happening if they do win out, if Georgia Tech wins their game, and if Virginia also wins their remaining game against Virginia Tech, then suddenly, we've got a 3-way tie atop the ACC. The nod would go to Georgia Tech and Virginia over SMU.
Yes.
But a lot of times as we get deeper into these tiebreakers, it's based on conference opponent win percentage. And this is the part of it that I can't really calculate. There are too many like permutations.
Okay.
So there are definite ways that even in that scenario, based on what goes on elsewhere in the ACC, SMU could still end up getting the nod over, whoever. So this is all to say, yes, SMU is very much still in this. No, they're not ranked, but SMU was in the ACC title game a year ago. SMU could have won the ACC title game a year ago. SMU was in the playoff a year ago. This is still a pretty good team. Still a pretty good team.
Even more specifically, so since the bye week, SMU, just to spotlight them for 30 seconds longer, they were disastrous on defense before the bye, giving up a ton to TCU and Baylor. Since then, 18, 10, 24, 13, 20, and 13. And if you don't believe in the voodoo of the letdown look-ahead sandwich tie, they beat Clemson on the road, they beat Miami at home, and in between, they lost to Wake Forest on the road.
Beautiful.
Their defense has quietly become like a top 20-ish unit once again. They're one of the best, like 5 or 7 red zone defenses in America. They have an absolute opportunity to be like America's grower of the year. support local farmers.
Support, yeah. Shout out to Dino, by the way, out on Spotify. You see he loves the letdowns and the look aheads.
Oh, good.
Big fan. Not really, but okay. Let's go to this one from Efren.
Okay.
Which conference is the best?
Okay.
He goes, your opinion is the only one that matters. It has to be one singular conference. It can't be like, yeah, the ACC is parity, but the Big 12 is better teams at the top. I will use your claims in any argument I have. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the best conference, Dan. What do you think?
Okay.
Top to bottom, who's the best conference?
So it's extremely personal. So is it top to bottom entertaining? Is it top to bottom, like, if everybody was head to head and played like a 136 team playoff, who would have the most impressive performances in the aggregate?
I mean, this is a bring me a rock type question, right?
Right.
What does government mean to you type question?
Yeah, of course. Shout out Kyrie.
Everything is sort of relative.
Mm-hmm.
Pound for pound, I think the SEC is the best conference.
Okay.
I think the SEC is deeper. I think if you take the fifth, the sixth best team in the SEC and put them up against Illinois, I guess, in the Big 10, whoever in the Big 12 or the ACC, I would be inclined to go SEC in most of those matchups. I also think the bottom of the SEC is dramatically better than the bottom of some of the other conferences that would be in this conversation.
Right.
The bottom of the SEC is clearly better than the bottom of the Big 12. It's clearly better than the bottom of the ACC. It's clearly better than the bottom of the Big 10.
Right.
So I think in terms of overall depth, maybe the heights aren't quite as high as, say, the Big 10. But overall conference depth, for me, I think the ACC is deepest and best.
I think this year it's the SEC. I agree with you this year. I agree because of the depth that there have been close losses by the teams at the bottom, even some wins at the bottom over teams perceived to be nearer in that top grouping. And so I'm with you. I think when you look at the metric that I looked at immediately was like, how many like good to really good quarterbacks do each of these conferences have? And I think the SEC has the most in this moment. Where like if Lenoris Sellers is having like the 11th best season of the quarterbacks in your conference, then that's probably the conference. And so when I went through the Big 12, when I went through the Big 10, there's just the chunk of quarterbacks at the bottom of these other conferences gave me the willies to such an extent that I could not even consider them. Like, if you're talking to me about considering, you know, a Wisconsin quarterback situation, Preston Stone at Northwestern, and like all these dudes, and all due respect, of course, but it becomes very difficult for me when you look at the bottom half of the quarterbacks in the Big Ten to say like, yeah, that's where we are as a country. The Big Ten is who we are. So no, I think it's the SEC this season, but not in such a way that I don't think that I just sort of put myself into a corner grammatically. I don't think the SEC is impenetrable. I've used that word twice on this episode now. I don't think they are head and shoulders, that the top is head and shoulders above the best of the sport. But as a conference, in terms of entertainment, quarterback play, number of game-changing players at various positions, it's the SEC this year.
I think I'm in agreement with you. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Let's go to this one. This came in via email from Eric. Which team's coaching search is the biggest domino during the current coaching carousel?
Texas. Oh, was I not supposed to say that yet?
Look, if Sark decides he wants to go to the NFL, that'd be a pretty big domino. Yeah.
Okay. The publicly known, I just educated making that up Texas thing. The publicly known coach opening that is going to be the biggest domino to me is likely Florida.
I think this is a wrong question, to be honest with you.
What is the right question?
I think the right question is which coach and not which coaching opening.
Like which coach's decision?
I think Lane Kiffin's the biggest domino. I think Lane Kiffin's the one that any number of vacancies out there would love to have Lane Kiffin, right? Whether it's Florida, whether it's LSU, even Penn State. You know, pretty much everybody across the board would take Lane Kiffin at this point. And, you know, we have seen sort of this hierarchy of potential coach candidates that have been floated out there for any number of jobs now, right? It's Lane Kiffin, it's Eli Drinkwitz, it's John Sumrall, it's Eric Morris, it's Ryan Silverfield. Like, it's all the same names for all these jobs at this point. If you take Lane Kiffin off the board, we slide down a peg. Doesn't mean they're a worse coach. I'm not implying that.
Right.
But at least with how we're thinking about this based on public reporting, if Lane's off the board, then suddenly, we're going down to like option C in a lot of cases.
Sure.
So I think what he decides to do will be the most interesting. I did read some reporting, I think from our friends out at CBS earlier today, that sort of talked you through what the thinking is in Oxford. Initially, they felt very good about keeping him. Most recently, they have felt a little less good about keeping him, starting to think maybe that he would take the job at Florida. But as everybody has been quick to point out, Lane Kiffin, he changes his mind based on the wind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough to pin down exactly what this guy wants to do. But I think if he decides to go to Florida, obviously there's, the question of, all right, who's going to step into a very good Ole Miss program? Right. If he decides to stay put, good for Ole Miss, but suddenly everyone else is looking elsewhere. That's how we get Jed Fish at Florida, by the way, just FYI.
Yeah.
Which is definitely still a very real possibility.
Which would be maybe another potential UCLA Florida battle like we had with Chip Kelly, allegedly.
Yeah.
At least a coach considering those two places. Sure. What I'm curious about, and I don't follow this closely enough, is what more could, if it's not a money thing, if we're going to take Lane at his word, that he said his decision is not going to be rooted in financial reasons, what more could Ole Miss do to make itself attractive to Lane Kiffin in the long term? Because
I think
he apparently has everything he's asked for, at least allegedly.
I think it's probably a prestige thing. It's probably a prestige thing, and we have a question about that next from Davis that we can talk about. But Ole Miss has complied with every one of his demands.
I think so.
And so if he leaves to go somewhere else, it's about the prestige of the Florida program. It maybe is a lifestyle decision to want to move to Gainesville. If you're Lane Kiffin, he's obviously been very successful.
I think his family's all in Oxford now. I think everybody's sort of moved and
everybody's there. His kid's a recruit playing for like Oxford High or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be a lifestyle decision to leave at this point if they wanted to live somewhere else. But
I think there is. I don't know if it's the prestige of Florida, but that is tied into it, or LSU, or anywhere else he would consider. It's, I think, more 5 stars and high 4 stars in the South and nationally would be likelier to consider immediately Florida and LSU as potential destinations before Ole Miss. Not because of anything he has or hasn't done at Ole Miss, just because the recognition and I could be the next blank, right? I could be the next Patrick Peterson. I could be the next Derek Stingley. I could be the next Tim Tebow. I could be the next take your pick, right? Is a little bit more pronounced even in the modern era, even with all of Florida's struggles, than what Ole Miss has been lately. I don't know if that's fair, but that seems to be the reality, at least from my vantage point.
I'll tell you this about Ole Miss. You want to know what else can Ole Miss do to keep them there?
Sure.
Ole Miss is going to make the playoff this year.
That's true.
And
for the first time.
They were on the outside looking in a year ago. You might recall Lane taking to social media, kind of arguing with anybody who he could argue with to make that case. But I think as a proof of concept, going to the playoff, probably hosting a game in the playoff, I think that will help.
Yeah.
Unless he's already made up his mind, I think that will help. Just to prove that, yes, it's possible here. All these guys are competitive. They want to win national championships. But hosting a playoff game in the first round, maybe winning, maybe being favored, whatever, I think all of that stuff would help keep him there.
Okay. The proof of concept of coaching a team and leading a program that is no longer playoff-ish, but playoff official.
Let's go to Davis, who says, in this new era of college football, do programs need to redefine success, and what defines a, quote, blue blood program? If so, how do fans need to change their mindset along those same lines, Dan?
When you said wrong question before about not the coach, but rather the coach rather than the school or the job, I don't think this is a reasonable question because this is an unreasonable sport populated by unreasonable fans. Like the idea of college football fans changing their perspective. Do they need to? Of course. Absolutely 100%. They need to adjust their perspective on what constitutes a winning season in these like gigantic conferences that in some years are absolutely stacked 1 through 7, however you want to phrase it. It just won't happen because all you want to do as a college football fan is win every game 100-0,
Right.
develop a bunch of first-round picks. And now look, there are schools that have had no success that to have even a taste of a 7, 8, 9 win season is incredible. But let me tell you something about Indiana fans. If they have one more year after this one of a double-digit win season, they're all going to be like I was after flying first class once. This is who I am now, everybody.
Yeah.
It's just you lose perspective quickly when you get that taste. That why aren't we like we were last year? Why aren't we like we were these past couple of seasons? So if they go 12-0 this season, Indiana, and if they go 10-2, 11-1, 12-0 next season, and they have made the playoff for 3 straight seasons, and then don't make the playoff and only go 8-4, 9-3, it is going to be no. I'm a first class flyer now, and I'm not slumming it in 32D, guys. And that's just what happens in this sport. You get that taste, and you don't want to go back.
I'm thinking of the Forks episode in The Bear where Richie just decides he's a suit guy.
Yeah.
I'm a suit guy now.
I'm a suit guy
This
now.
is what I wear. I think we need to redefine almost everything in this era.
Of course.
To Davis's question. Like being a blue blood, quote unquote, is obviously still relevant because these are programs that have committed resources to building out their football program. It's clearly a program that moves the needle, that gets ratings, a program that simply cannot be left out if you are trying to tell the story of college football. That's what a blue blood is.
By the way, word definitions matter, and blue blood does not just mean like one of the best. Blue blood actually means like historical best.
Right.
So like you can't just become a blue blood if you're good for 5 years. You had to have been good in 1953 or it doesn't count.
This is, I think, my bigger point.
Yeah.
Tradition doesn't buy you what it used to.
No.
You know, like part of why I like the combination of what we have now, that being the bigger playoff field, NIL, and the transfer portal.
Yeah.
Of course, it's introduced chaos, but it's also like the perfect storm for a disruptor like Indiana to just come out of nowhere, take the whole thing by storm, and upend what a lot of us thought to be true.
And it's in every conference now. There's
It
Indiana,
is.
there's Texas Tech, there's Vanderbilt, it's Virginia this season. Like people are able to jump up quickly, and it's great.
It is great. And I know people throw around the P word a lot, parity.
Mm-hmm.
It is not parity to the extent of the NFL. It's not even close to that. I do think this sport needed a pretty healthy dose of parity just to make things interesting again.
Yeah.
You know, I can't tell you, we've been doing this show forever. If I had $1 for every person that emailed us over the last 10 years expressing some concern that it's always the same teams, it's always
Of course.
Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, I'm going to stop watching. It doesn't do it for me. It feels inevitable. Week 2. We don't have that anymore.
It couldn't have been worse in terms of enthusiasm when it was like Alabama, Clemson, 3 out of 4 years or something.
It wasn't. And we know because we've done this for a long time. We know what the vibe is of the Verballerhood.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not your team is involved in this playoff chase, whether or not you're getting absolutely hollowed out in the transfer portal via NIL and all that stuff, that is absolutely a very real concern. This is not a new setup that benefits you if you do not have resources.
Right.
So there is still very much a situation where you've got haves and have-nots. That has not gone away. It probably won't go away anytime soon. But there are definitely new variables in this day and age. I was looking before just at the bracket that I sort of translated from our Verballer Top 12 poll. 7 of the 12 teams in that projected field are not what we would consider blue bloods.
Right.
I think that's a good thing.
Same.
I think that makes it fun. I think that gives people a reason to care, even if you don't have a dog in the fight. Pick a new team. Pick a team that you're excited to see be there, and let's root for some chaos. But the whole blue blood thing, that definitely still has a place in the sport. It is absolutely the kind of thing that we write about when we try to tell the story of college football.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of its actual relevance now, I think it is greatly diminished.
It's all why, this idea of being able to jump up quickly, this idea of being able to suddenly have a seat at the table with an expanded playoff, with the ability to restock your roster quickly and come to the table financially in a way that you weren't able to. It's why there are a subset of Oregon State fans who are willing to absolutely debase and defile themselves to do anything vile, horrible, unspeakable that NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, an Oregon State alum, to get him in the boat, right?
Yeah.
Because the thirst is so real to become that team who is suddenly relevant and suddenly, a scary team for the traditional powers. And so if anything, it's just going to make people more unrealistic. So here we are. We said it before that like Kurt Cignetti's success is the worst possible thing to happen to new coach hires across this sport. He is screwing everybody over. But there's truth to it. There's absolute truth to the idea that you can jump up if you find the right guy, if you get everybody behind you, if you're at the right place. You can't ever say never.
You can't ever say never, and I think how do I want to phrase this? Like
Is that how you say his name, Jensen Huang, or is it Huang? I don't remember.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I didn't even know his name. I know what he looks like.
Yes.
But
But
I had
no,
no idea he went to Oregon State.
He
I know
went
wears
to Oregon
the leather
State.
jackets all the time.
Yes.
Kind of.
He wears
trying
like
to
the
be
Tom
cool.
Cruise Mission Impossible, like leathery biker jacket. There is a grouping of people there, and maybe it's 3 guys, I don't know, who are like, how do we do this? How do we do this? This guy's worth $400 trillion. We just need a sliver, and we can run the West Coast.
I think there is almost a false promise, though, when you look at a guy like Kurt Cignetti, because now he's been successful 2 years with the transfer portal.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of other schools around college football that have tried and have failed. Mike Norvell has failed 2 years in a row. It is hard to hit year in and year out if you are building via the transfer portal. Now, I think the hope is if you're Kurt Cignetti, if you're Indiana, that you kind of fake it until you make it on the recruiting side. They're obviously getting good talent to come in. Fernando Mendoza might win the Heisman, but he's a transfer.
Well,
Right?
it's
Indiana
everything. It's everything with Indiana. But yeah,
it's everything, right? But I think the point is, right now they are primarily building through the portal, and as we have seen time and again across college football, while there are schools that hit, Texas Tech is one of them that's hit so far this year. There are plenty of others that haven't. It is really hard to maintain success with that formula year in and year out.
Yeah.
Let's do 2 more questions here, okay? Then we'll
Please.
call it a day.
Please.
This one from Jeremy. Can Utah make the playoffs without winning the Big 12 and then win at least one game in the college football playoff? So let me say this, okay?
Okay.
I want to kick part 2 of that over to you. Right now, ESPN is saying that there's about a 39% chance of Utah making the playoff, which is not nothing. I mean, that is a very real possibility that they could make it, even if they don't win the Big 12.
Right.
Even though it wasn't Jeremy's question, it is still worth noting that Utah can also still win the Big 12. So they technically have 2 pathways in.
Right.
So yes, that is a very real possibility. We can debate whether or not we think that's realistic, but mathematically speaking, it's about 39%. Do we think that Utah can win a playoff game? That is my question for you. If they get in, can they win a playoff game? Bearing in mind that it is almost definitely going to be a road game against the teams seeded 5 through 8.
Right. My answer is yes. My answer is yes. When you have that defense, it's a top 15 defense that has been tested. It hasn't been amazing week in and week out, but it has been very, very good most of the time. I would still have my questions about Devin Dampier on the road against some of these defenses, if that's what we're going to come down to, be it, Texas Tech again or Oregon or Ole Miss or any of those teams, perhaps in that region of the 12. But yeah, I think they could win that game. I don't know if they could win that game if it required them to get to 31 points with a lot of it coming through the air. But they've been scoring points. Like, you can't say that the offense is an issue. This is a top 10, 12 offense in the country.
My gut was immediately to say no. Because I think most of the teams that they would end up playing are good enough defensively to make Utah very one-dimensional.
Agree.
And as you said, force them to win through the air, which I'm not convinced they can do. But I should point out, if we want to be honest about this, if we look at the SP+, which we swear by, Utah is 8th. They're slightly behind Georgia and Ole Miss. They're slightly ahead of Texas A&M, Miami, Alabama, and Oklahoma. So per Bill's numbers, he's got Utah right there. Bill is looking at this, at least his numbers are, and saying Utah can contend. Utah could beat those teams.
Yeah, I don't think Utah is radically beneath anybody in this top 12 conversation, Utah included. So, yes, I think Utah could win that game. We don't question their coaching staff, I don't think. I think the only thing we really question here is they played Texas Tech close for most of that game, and then it got out of hand. Will Hammond, who was not that good after the fact before he got hurt, was incredible against Utah.
He was really good, yeah.
And hopefully remains their quarterback of the future and, has bright days ahead of him. And they played BYU to a draw, basically, in a big rivalry spot, and BYU themselves, top 10. So I think they're of that quality, and it's not like any of these teams that we've mentioned as being in that, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 range have been beating teams by 4 touchdowns every week. Right. So that's only kind of Ohio State, and they likely wouldn't play Ohio State in the first round because Ohio State's going to have a bye. So yeah, I think they absolutely could win, but I'd put it as kind of unlikely, but not crazy.
It's not crazy. They've got a defense good enough to make it ugly.
Yeah.
And that's sort of been the template for Kyle Whittingham all these years.
Yeah.
It's been very good. Very good in that circumstance. Let's close it out with this, Dan, from Kevin, who says, how about them Missouri State Bears?
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy.
So look, this is Missouri State's first year in the FBS.
And how did it begin, Ty?
It began losing 73-13 to USC.
Yeah.
It was not a great way to start. But since then, Missouri State has gone on a bit of a run.
Mm-hmm.
They are 6-3. I will add that of their 5 wins over FBS competition, 5 were by 1 score, all of them.
Great.
Their remaining 3 games are UTEP, Kennesaw, and Louisiana Tech, all 3 of which are, you guessed it, also projected to be 1-score games.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, by the traditional metric, they would be bowl eligible, but because this is their first year in the FBS, you know the way this works. There's usually a 2-year probationary period where they can't go to a bowl game.
Right.
They have, or at least intend on, petitioning the NCAA if there aren't enough teams, or if the NCAA has a change of heart. Historically, they haven't been very receptive to the idea of a new FBS team popping up into a bowl game. But
right. We'll see. I'm sure they're petitioning. Yeah.
They're doing their part. So, but to Kevin's point here, it's been, I think, a really good first season for Missouri State. Good for them.
And they lost to SMU and Western Kentucky after that USC loss, neither of which are embarrassing losses. Winning is a skill, especially when you're making this jump. And so, I don't know. The other team, Delaware, has been pretty decent too, right?
Blue Hens, baby, you know it.
So the 2 new teams, those are the only ones, right, that have jumped in this season.
Yep.
Delaware this season, they've won. I guess they've split their last 4, 2 out of their last 4, but beat a decent enough Louisiana Tech team, beat Middle Tennessee. They themselves are in position to be traditionally bowl eligible at 6 wins, even if they're not going to go to a bowl this season.
They've got Wake and they've got UTEP here on their remaining schedule, so we'll see.
They could get a signature win over Wake Forest.
Oh, my God.
That'd be great.
Potentially 9-3, 8-4 Wake Forest, which is wild in its own right.
Shout out Ryan Carty and the job he's done at Delaware.
So look, the three biggies this week are USC at Oregon.
Yes.
That's at 3:30 on CBS. Pitt at Georgia Tech. That is 7 o'clock on ESPN. And BYU at Cincinnati. That is 8 p.m. on Fox. Mm-hmm. There are obviously other interesting games this week. Starting on Friday night in the Mountain West, Hawaii at UNLV should be a great matchup. I'm excited to watch that game. But the three big ones, USC Oregon, Pitt Georgia Tech, BYU Cincinnati. We are going to do our first official alt-cast of the year, are we not, on Saturday?
Yeah, we did sort of an alt-cast watching games a few weeks ago. It was an exciting afternoon just to test things out of games. But yes, for a specific game, we're going to do Oregon USC at, I believe it's the 3:30 Eastern game on CBS, which bonus, both if you do this, and when I say you as a listener, if you watch the alt-cast along with the Oregon game as a second screen experience, and because we're doing it as a second screen experience, you don't have to listen to Gary Danielson call this game.
Come on, he's all right.
Let me tell you something about my relationship with Gary Danielson.
Go ahead.
I think Brad Nessler's good. We've had Jenny Dell on the show.
Does not eat.
I didn't care one way or the other about Gary Danielson when he was calling SEC games because I didn't have any rooting interest. But then as soon as I watched the Oregon-Iowa game, I immediately went to the side of like, yeah, I get it. It's like when you watch a game that you have a rooting interest in and he's on the call, I'm sure he's a nice dude. I'm sure he's beloved by the crew. But it was a tough broadcast experience for me as an Oregon person. And so if I'm speaking with Ty Hildebrand of the Solid Verbal, I mean, that's going to be a pleasure. It's great.
We're going to make it fun. I got some ideas. I got some ideas for ways that we can improve the alt-cast over what we did last year.
Okay. Can't wait.
So it'll be fun. Stop on by the YouTube channel. We'll make sure we post it everywhere. But even if it's for a few minutes, just say hello, type something in the chat, give us your reaction to what else is going on around college football. It doesn't matter. We're all friends here.
Yes.
Other games that I think are of particular interest, Louisville on the road at SMU.
Definitely.
We already talked up why that's important. Miami on the road at Virginia Tech. I see Miami's a pretty healthy favorite. Maybe Virginia Tech's getting ready to hire James Franklin. Maybe they're not. I have no idea at this point. But going to Lane Stadium is never that easy. We've also got Missouri at Oklahoma. Is there any kind of letdown effect for Oklahoma after the big win from a week ago?
Yeah.
Don't know. Baylor at Arizona is an interesting game. Arizona's been real good. Real good on defense, right?
Arizona's defense, those safeties are really fun. I really like this Arizona team. Noah Fafita bounced back from a pretty terrible 2024. They're really, really fun. They just like you watch me like this team has their act together. Like against all odds, they have their act together. So shout out Danny Gonzalez and Brent Brennan and all these players. Yeah.
Arkansas, Texas could be entertaining. Kentucky, Vanderbilt could be very entertaining. Kentucky has sort of had a bit of a rebirth here second half of the year.
By the way,
go ahead.
An incredible letdown look-ahead sandwich situation for Texas.
Oh my
Between
God,
Georgia and Texas A&M,
yeah,
Arkansas has the opportunity to do something incredible here. Bobby Petrino marching into Austin? Sure.
We've got Duke, North Carolina.
Yeah.
No other reason. It's a rivalry. ECU on the road at UTSA. Huge implications in the American. Huge implications. We got K-State at Utah. At one point or another, this looked like it would be a monster Big 12 game. It is currently at Utah minus 17.5 at time of recording.
Man.
We got Michigan on the road at Maryland. We've got TCU. Maryland, by the way, retaining Mike Loxley. I don't know if you saw that.
With an NIL boost for the roster, yeah.
NIL boost. TCU at Houston could be fun. Nebraska at Penn State. Maybe Matt Rule will have some second thoughts and decide to stay in State College. Who knows?
By the way, just the sidebar of all these that you're mentioning, Houston is like your number one candidate of like very quiet. Impressive year.
Man. I told you.
I know. Really impressive season. And I don't know if they're officially out of the Big 12 championship running.
Yeah.
Maybe they are, but it's not by much. Look, are they ranked right now?
Houston, I don't believe is ranked. No.
Houston is the number. Yeah, they're number 25 in the AP
number 25.
poll.
Okay.
That's great.
Good for Houston.
Yeah, I think Connor Wigman is technically the most statistically efficient Big 12 quarterback right now. Continue.
Yeah, Houston would need a lot to break.
Okay,
Houston
that's fine.
would need, obviously, to win against TCU. They would need to win their final game against Baylor, but they would probably need some help from Arizona. They'd need some help from UCF. They would likely need some help from TCU. There are probably some ways that you could program this to get Houston into that final game, but not likely.
Yeah, West Virginia really played spoiler for this season, right?
Oh my God.
Losing a couple weeks ago to West Virginia. Otherwise, they'd be kind of driver's seat. I mean, it's a tough couple to finish out the year, and they scored more against Texas Tech than BYU did. There's that. And they didn't even have their quarterback for much in that game.
They would need Kansas State to beat Utah this week. They would obviously need to win their game next week against Baylor, which right now Baylor might be favored.
Okay.
They would need Arizona to beat Arizona State. They would likely need TCU to beat Cincinnati. I think if they also need UCF to beat BYU.
That's a tough ask.
Speaking of parlays, if they went out and those other things happen, they would likely go to the Big 12 title game, getting a nod above BYU based on winning percentage against teams played one time within the conference. So it gets complicated. You get down to the sixth tiebreaker, but that's what it would take in order to get Houston.
Either way, they went 4-8 last year, and 9-3 plus is absolutely on the table.
Very much so.
Yeah.
All right. To round things out, New Mexico at Air Force. I know you like New Mexico.
Yeah. I'm an egghead.
We have Tennessee, Florida this week. Tennessee favored by 3.5 on the road in the Swamp.
Yeah.
Cal Stanford is this week, and Arizona State on the road at Colorado. Arizona State, by the way, still an outside chance to make the Big 12 title game.
That's true.
For what it's worth.
It's big game. It's Cal Stanford. It's
the big game.
As we all anticipated, on the ACC network. God, everything's so stupid. Okay. I think that's great. And wait, is it Lehigh Lafayette this weekend too?
Lehigh Lafayette, yeah.
Oh,
that's a big one, man. That's a real big one.
There's a lot happening.
There's an awful lot happening. If you care about such things, by the way.
Yeah.
Now that you bring up the FCS rankings, I believe the latest FCS rankings still have Lehigh at 4th. But of note, if we go all the way down to Division II, Dan.
Yeah.
We've talked about Ferris State before because of Trinidad Chambliss.
Yeah.
But there is another local team, Kutztown, right down the street from me. Kutztown is currently 11-0 and 3rd in Division II. Just saying, in the coaches poll, Division II.
But Mercer number 6, by the way, in the FCS poll, taking on Auburn on the road this week.
They're no Lehigh. But
was a big look-ahead spot for Auburn ahead of the Iron Bowl.
Harvard up into the top 10.
Harvard top 10. This is the first year the Ivies can get into the FCS playoffs.
Great.
So
I love it.
It's all happening.
Why don't we leave it there? We've got a bunch to discuss on the Thursday episode.
Yes.
We, of course, will preview all of these games and much, much more. We will talk through what it takes to get into our Run the Board Pick'em game. You can, of course, go on out to Verballers.com and sign up as a certified or premium Verballer. That'll get you access into all the goodies. You can play in the game. You get the episodes without the ads. You get them a little bit early. You can go on our Discord. You can post questions for shows like this.
Correct.
That's all I got, Dan.
Same.
I'm losing my voice over here.
But you're looking sharp in your new merch.solidverbal.com shirt. College football all the time.
See that?
I love it.
It pops, man. I like it.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
For that guy over there, Dan, for myself, Ty, we'll talk to you all on Thursday. In the meantime, stay solid.
Peace.